Disease control products are made of natural organic ingredients.
Lunch?
I grabbed a hot dog.
No vegetables? Have a V8.
Everyone loves Chia Pet. They're fun to watch and easy to grow.
We tore up the roots of ancient gardens and called it progress, erasing crops that once fed entire nations with nothing but soil, sun, and wisdom. So what did we lose when we stopped planting what they once cherished? Stick around. Some of these might just change how you see your dinner plate. One of the most surprising forgotten vegetables Native Americans grew that needs to come back is the groundnut. Known as Apios americana, this curious potato-like tuber once covered fields and forests across the Northeast. In fact, before corn took center stage, groundnut was actually the staple of many native diets. Families would roast, boil, or mash these small, protein-rich tubers, creating hearty meals packed with energy. Even European colonists quickly caught on, calling it a true lifesaver in times of scarcity. Its vines spread easily, producing plentiful harvests year after year. Groundnuts even enrich the soil, boosting other plants around them. So why has this nutritional powerhouse vanished from our tables? Rediscovering this incredible vegetable could transform modern meals, just like it sustained entire communities centuries ago. But groundnut isn't the only lost gem. What about a native root so deliciously sweet and nutty, it was a winter staple, even sweeter after the frost? Get ready to meet your new favorite tuber. Meet the sunchoke, also called Jerusalem artichoke, a forgotten vegetable Native Americans relied on throughout the coldest months. Despite the misleading name, this plant isn't from Jerusalem, and it's not an artichoke either. It's a North American native with sunflower-like blooms and edible roots that grow abundantly underground. Native tribes treasured these roots for their nutty, sweet flavor, often roasted over open fires or sliced thin and crisped. Stored throughout winter, sunchokes provided a steady source of vitamins, minerals, and fiber, even when other vegetables disappeared. Colonists quickly adopted them, impressed by their ability to thrive without much care. But today, sunchokes are almost entirely forgotten, overshadowed by common potatoes. Reintroducing this delightful vegetable could bring back both nutrition and flavor, not to mention variety, into our everyday meals. Now, while the sunchoke warmed winter bellies, another plant offered a refreshing bite straight from the forest floor. Imagine something crisp, fresh, and cucumber-flavored that Native Americans valued highly as both food and medicine. That's exactly what the Indian cucumber root delivered. This fascinating forest plant provided indigenous communities with a crisp, refreshing snack straight from the ground. Known for its mild, cucumber-like flavor, Native Americans often foraged it on their journeys, appreciating it both for its taste and medicinal uses. Packed with hydration and nutrients, Indian cucumber root was more than just a tasty treat. It was revered as a health-boosting staple. It eased digestive issues and helped soothe inflammation, becoming an essential part of natural medicine kits. People enjoyed it raw, right after harvesting, making it an easy, delicious, and nutritious snack on the go. Yet, despite its many virtues, it faded from modern consciousness, overshadowed by familiar supermarket produce. Imagine reviving this nutritious, tasty treasure and adding it back into our diets today. Healthy, accessible, and refreshingly flavorful. But speaking of nutritious and colorful additions, have you heard of the vegetable with vibrant red leaves once cooked just like spinach, offering both beauty and bounty? Meet the Hopi red dye amaranth, a striking plant known as much for its deep, vibrant colors as its incredible nutritional value. Native Americans didn't just admire it. They relied heavily on this leafy wonder, harvesting its colorful foliage to cook like spinach. Rich in vitamins and minerals, these vibrant leaves became a nutritious staple, elevating traditional dishes while providing essential nourishment. Beyond the kitchen, Hopi tribes use the amaranth's vivid red pigments in ceremonial and everyday dyes, enhancing textiles and pottery with a stunning touch of color. Imagine a vegetable that nourishes your body and brightens your world. That was the true value of Hopi red dye amaranth. Despite its versatility and beauty, this incredible plant fell out of favor, disappearing from dinner tables and fields alike. But what if we brought it back, enjoying both its culinary and cultural richness once again? And if that sounds intriguing, wait until you taste the peppery root vegetable native tribes relied on for its unique flavor and resilience through harsh winters. That brings us to Mashua, a peppery-tasting root crop native tribes trusted to survive the coldest mountain winters. Also known as Tropiolum tuberosum, this hardy vegetable thrived in harsh climates, storing effortlessly throughout the freezing months. Its bright roots offered a distinct, spicy flavor unlike anything else grown nearby, adding warmth and zest to winter dishes. Native Americans roasted or boiled Mashua, incorporating its peppery kick into soups and stews, bringing comfort and nutrition to the toughest seasons. Even today, mountain communities in South America continue growing Mashua, recognizing its incredible durability and nutritional profile. So why has such a robust, tasty, and easy-to-grow vegetable become forgotten? Reintroducing Mashua could enhance modern meals with a flavorful punch, particularly in climates where typical crops struggle to flourish. And speaking of flavor, there's another wild vegetable growing abundantly in North American forests. With a taste so intensely savory and onion-like, people hunt for it passionately each spring. Curious yet? Ramps, or wild leeks, were once a forage secret among eastern woodlands tribes, prized for their bold, garlicky flavor and potent spring energy. Long before hipster foodies turned ramps into a farmer's market flex, indigenous communities harvested them from shaded forest floors to welcome the thaw of winter. These green bursts weren't just tasty, they were seasonal indicators, signaling a time to reconnect with the land. Ramps packed more punch than your average onion and were often sautéed, added to stews, or eaten raw for their sharp tang. They grew in patches, not abundance, so harvesting was done respectfully to ensure next season's return. And for all their flavor, they had a reputation. Ramp breath was real. So if your cousin showed up reeking of garlic, you knew spring had arrived. It's funny how what was once a humble forage staple is now a gourmet garnish. But the real story of seasonal greens doesn't stop in the Appalachians. Further west, and just as overlooked, there's a green you've probably passed 100 times without even knowing its worth. Let's talk about Chenopodium, or lamb's quarters. Chenopodium, known more casually as lamb's quarters, grows like a weed and eats like royalty. This wild green has been dismissed as backyard clutter for decades, but it was once carefully tended in indigenous gardens. Its triangular leaves and dusty white coating hide a powerhouse of nutrients, richer in calcium, iron, and protein than even spinach. Eastern tribes cooked it like you would collards, or dried it for soups and broths when the cold came creeping in. The taste is somewhere between earthy and nutty, and when it bolts in the summer, the seeds themselves can be ground into flour or tossed into stews. Lamb's quarters were a 2-for-1 deal. Greens in the spring, grain in the fall. These days, it gets pulled like a weed, tossed aside while spinach steals the spotlight. But back then, this was green gold. And if you think this garden invader was impressive, wait until you meet the marshland powerhouse that once fed entire coastal communities. Tuckahoe, or Peltandra virginica, isn't winning any beauty contests anytime soon. But this marsh-dwelling tuber kept bellies full from Florida up to the mid-Atlantic. It's got a name that sounds like a punchline, but to coastal tribes, it was serious sustenance. Growing in brackish wetlands, Tuckahoe had to be leached or roasted thoroughly. Raw, it was toxic. But done right, it became a starchy, potato-like staple perfect for roasting or grinding into meal. Its preparation was labor-intensive, but that didn't stop it from becoming a dietary mainstay. Even its leaves were used for wrapping other foods during cooking. The fact that it grew in soggy, difficult places made it a reliable backup when other crops failed. People remembered where patches of Tuckahoe thrived like they remembered old fishing spots. Quiet, sacred, passed down. Today, it's almost completely forgotten, overshadowed by potatoes and corn. But its legacy as a survival route is carved deep into coastal soil. Still, when you head inland, there's another tuber that not only fed people, but followed them. The prairie turnip, Sorrelea esculenta, was the ultimate road snack before there were roads. Found in the Great Plains and treasured by many nomadic tribes, especially the Lakota, it was harvested in summer, sliced thin, and dried to store through the winter. Packed with carbs, fiber, and a light sweetness, it was a natural energy bar centuries before trail mix hit store shelves. You'd find prairie turnips growing wild in open grasslands, their flowering tops hinting at the swollen root below. It took skill to dig them up without snapping the root, but that effort paid off. Once dried, they lasted for years and could be thrown into stews or simply chewed like a dried fig. They weren't just food, they were portability, reliability, survival. Some even call them the original indigenous jerky, with way less salt. And while the prairie turnip played its role in the open fields, down in the chaparral-covered hills of California, there was a different kind of giant hiding underground. Wilder, tougher, and a little more dramatic. Manroot, or Mara macrocarpus, sounds like a myth, and kind of looks like one too. This massive wild cucumber grew across the rocky hillsides of California, its sprawling vines wrapping through dry scrub like green lightning. The name Manroot comes from its gnarly, humanoid-looking tuber, which can weigh over 100 pounds and resemble a body hunched beneath the earth. Indigenous Californians didn't just marvel at it, they used it. The starchy tuber was roasted to remove toxins, and when prepared correctly, it became a dense, calorie-rich food source. But that's not all. Manroot was also a pharmacy. Poultices made from its root-treated sores, and its juice was used to stun fish in streams, a genius fishing hack. Today, most people see it as just an odd vine, an invasive curiosity. But to those who knew how to unlock its potential, it was equal parts food, medicine, and tool. And as we trace these edible echoes across North America, we land next in the wetlands again, where an arrow-shaped plant rooted itself in both diet and legend. Arrowhead root, or wapato, was the aquatic treasure of riverbanks and marshes across the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Its heart-shaped leaves floated like tiny canoes, while underneath, tubers nestled in the muck waiting to be plucked. Harvesting wapato wasn't a solo act, it was a communal event. Women would wade into cold, muddy waters, using their feet to feel for the crunchy, potato-like roots below. Tribes like the Chinook and Kalapuya timed seasonal movements around wapato harvests. This wasn't just food, it was an event. The roots were roasted, boiled, or dried and stored, with a taste somewhere between a chestnut and a water chestnut. Wapato even held trade value. It was a marsh-grown currency. But as wetlands were drained and cities sprawled, its habitat shrank. Today, few recognize it beyond history books and restoration projects. Still, its legacy remains rooted in floodplain mud and memory. And speaking of roots with surprising sweetness, let's head south to discover a nut that's not a nut, and was sweet enough to thrive through hard times. Meet Chufa, or tiger nut. Chufa, more charmingly known as tiger nut, is a sweet, chewy tuber that looks like a wrinkled almond and grows like a weed in southern fields. Don't let the name fool you. It's not a nut at all, but a tiny root from a sedge plant. And yet, it's been making taste buds happy for thousands of years. Indigenous communities across the southeast cultivated chufa in patches and prized it for both flavor and endurance. High in fiber, iron, and natural sugars, it could be eaten raw, roasted, or pounded into a creamy, milky drink not unlike today's trendy horchata. These little roots could last long after other crops failed, and they were especially valuable during lean seasons or droughts. Digging up chufa was a bit like hunting for treasure, rooting through soft soil until you felt the telltale pop of a tuber coming free. In fact, wild boars love them so much, they've helped replant them across entire counties. But long before livestock figured them out, chufa was already nourishing generations. And if earthy sweet wasn't your flavor, maybe something with a bit more bite will suit you. Nodding onion is the bashful cousin of the garlic and onion family. a wild native whose delicate pink blossoms droop like they're whispering secrets to the wind. Found from woodlands to prairies, it was once a prized flavor booster in indigenous soups, broths, and roasted meats. Its bulbs are small, but what they lack in size, they make up for in concentrated, garlicky kick. Tribes harvested both the bulbs and the greens, which were tossed into dishes or dried for seasoning. The whole plant is edible and useful. Even the flowers attract pollinators and bees. But as livestock grazing expanded and development paved over wild landscapes, nodding onion began to disappear from sight and taste. Still, it hangs on in patches, sometimes mistaken for grass by the untrained eye. It's a culinary throwback, a memory of meals seasoned by the land itself. And while it may bow its head, it carries history with every bite. But if you thought wild onions were subtle, wait until you meet a potato that grew in mountain air and tasted like it belonged in a forest feast. Enter the Indian potato, or Claytonia tuberosa, is no ordinary spud. It's the high-altitude underdog of tubers, prized by northern tribes for its smooth, nutty flavor and soft, buttery texture. Found in alpine meadows and cold forest floors, this plant pops up in spring with delicate white or pink blossoms and fleshy leaves. But it's what's underneath that counts. The small, finger-like tubers that taste somewhere between a new potato and a mild parsnip. Harvesting them required a gentle hand. Dig too rough, and you'd bruise the fragile roots. But once cooked, they were a culinary comfort. Roasted whole, boiled into stews, or mashed with herbs and fat. Tribes like the Dandelion and Gwich'in sought them out as a seasonal treat, and their storage potential made them even more valuable. Today, they're rarely seen outside of wild plant guides or research gardens, quietly waiting in the soil for a comeback. But don't worry, the world of wild roots has more secrets to unearth. And the next one may look like a weed, but it once flavored medicine, meals, and more. Wild carrot, or Daucus pusillus, may not have the bright orange swagger of its modern cousins, but it's got a spicy past all its own. Native to much of North America, this delicate plant offered far more than just subtle flavor. It was a multi-use staple. Its slender, pale root added a peppery kick to broths and stews, while the feathery green top served as seasoning or garnish. But it wasn't just about taste. Wild carrot was also medicine. Tribes brewed its leaves into teas for digestion, while the seeds were used with extreme caution for reproductive health. Unlike today's supermarket carrots, these roots were wiry, strong, and full of character, often mistaken for inedible weeds. But those who knew what to look for, especially before it flowered, could coax out its full potential. It's a food that required both respect and timing, blending culinary and botanical knowledge. As gardens turned to rows of uniform crops, wild carrot faded into obscurity. But the story of edible roots doesn't stop with stews and seasoning. Some even inspired soda fountains and spring salads. Wild sarsaparilla root may have ended up as a fizzy footnote in the story of root beer, but it was so much more than a soft drink ingredient. Found in woodlands from the Northeast to the Midwest, this aromatic plant offered a pantry full of possibilities. Indigenous tribes used the root to brew tea and medicinal infusions. It had a spicy, sweet flavor and was believed to help with everything from colds to joint pain. But it wasn't just the root that mattered. In early spring, the tender shoots were harvested as a crisp green vegetable, a seasonal treat that brought fresh flavor after a long winter. Wild sarsaparilla was food, medicine, and even fragrance, making it one of those forest finds that pulled triple duty. But while it lingered in shade and soil, out on the dry plains, another plant was proving that even a squash with attitude could survive. And scrub your hands clean too. Buffalo gourd, the desert's take on squash, grew wild and tough across the arid stretches of the Great Plains and Southwest. Its sprawling vines and pungent scent made it hard to ignore. And while the gourd itself wasn't the tastiest raw, the seeds and flesh had real staying power. Tribes roasted the seeds for snacks or ground them into flour, while the flesh, bitter when fresh, could be cooked to tame its edge. The real surprise: the plant's natural saponins. When crushed and mixed with water, buffalo gourd made a foamy, soap-like cleanser used for washing both people and clothes. It was nature's two-in-one, food and hygiene, all from a drought-hardened vine. In a region where survival meant using everything available, buffalo gourd thrived as a multi-use marvel. But while this gourd toughed it out under the prairie sun, up in cooler climes, a much gentler root once held the title of sweet favorite, until corn barged in. Skirret might sound like something you'd say while sneezing, but it was once one of the sweetest roots in the patch. Grown in colder climates and cultivated in neat rows, this starchy vegetable produced clusters of thin, white roots that were naturally sugary. So sweet, in fact, they were sometimes eaten raw. Indigenous gardeners in northern regions prize skirret for its flavor and adaptability. It could be roasted, boiled, mashed, or made into fritters and stews, its taste falling somewhere between carrot and parsnip with a smooth, creamy texture. But as maize agriculture spread and corn began dominating both fields and diets, skirret fell out of favor. It just didn't scale like corn, nor did it compete with the growing number of introduced crops. But before skirret slipped away, another seasonal player showed up every spring, bearing fruit that had to be timed just right. Mayapple, with its umbrella-like leaves and curious little fruits, was both a warning and a gift from the forest. The plant itself is toxic in most parts and stages, but wait until that golden apple-like fruit ripens, and you've got a tangy, almost tropical snack. Indigenous communities were well aware of its dual nature. But Mayapple wasn't just about the fruit. In spring, its young shoots were boiled into greens, and its rhizomes had medicinal uses, especially for purging or as a topical treatment. Handling it took knowledge and respect, which was typical of many wild edibles. But when harvested with skill, Mayapple brought brightness to a plate and medicine to the cabinet. It's a reminder that some of the best flavors lie behind the greatest care. And speaking of slow, careful preparation, our next plant needed hours in the earth oven to shine. Blue camas is next. Blue camas, or Camassia quamash, was no quick snack. It was a culinary commitment. This northwest native blanketed meadows with starry blue flowers, a stunning sight that promised sweet rewards to those willing to wait. Its bulbs, once slow roasted for hours or even days, transformed from tough and starchy to melt-in-your-mouth sweet, tasting like baked pear with a hint of chestnut. Tribes like the Nez Perce, Coast Salish, and others planned entire gatherings around the camas harvest, digging carefully to avoid the look-alike death camas and cooking the bulbs in earth ovens to bring out their complex sugars. It wasn't just food, it was community, ceremony, and tradition. But camas isn't the only root with a secret identity. Next, we explore a plant that smells like heaven, flavors food and drink, and once led people through the woods by scent alone. Wild ginger, or Asarum canadense, once perfumed the forest floor with its unmistakable spicy sweet scent. Low to the ground and cloaked by heart-shaped leaves, it was the quiet culinary secret of eastern woodlands. The root, when dried and ground, offered a warm, peppery zing, used not only for flavoring stews and teas, but also in medicine to settle stomachs or ease colds. The plant's underground rhizomes were prized for their aroma, and even the leaves had a ghost of that signature scent. But wild ginger required wisdom. Too much, too often, and it could irritate. Still, when handled with care, it was a forest flavor that warmed both belly and breath. And just a few mountain ranges over, another plant had its own complicated relationship with usefulness. One that foamed like magic and fed like desperation. Soaproot, or Chlorogallum pomeridianum, is the ultimate wild multitasker. Part meal, part medicine, part emergency dish soap. Found in California's chaparral and oak woodlands, its long onion-like bulb was covered in coarse fibers and hidden deep in sandy soil. Western tribes, especially the Salinan and Miwok, used soaproot for everything from washing hair to stunning fish. But it wasn't just for cleaning. Once thoroughly roasted in a fire pit, the toxic saponins in the bulb broke down, and the flesh transformed into a surprisingly fibrous but edible food. It wasn't glamorous, but it filled the belly when times were lean. The bulb could also be dried and grated into a shampoo-like lather, or used medicinally for skin issues. Even the fibers were saved to make brushes. Now, if you thought a wild onion or a foaming root was strange, wait till you meet a sunflower's lesser-known sibling, forgotten by farms, but once familiar on the dinner table. Sunflower chokes, not to be confused with the modern-day sunchoke, were once a wild cousin to the sunflower that quietly fed families with tender, earthy bites. Before hybrid varieties took over, indigenous gatherers would seek out these thick-stemmed plants, not for their seeds, but for their soft, edible green parts. The unopened flower buds and young shoots were gathered in late spring and early summer, then roasted or steamed to bring out their nutty flavor. The taste? Somewhere between asparagus and artichoke with a sunflower twist. These plants were scattered across the plains and Midwest, thriving in sunny meadows and disturbed ground. Still, these chokes were a reminder that even common plants can hide uncommon value. And speaking of underdog veggies, let's move to something that flavored broths, healed wounds, and spiced up the same plant family as carrots and celery. Indian celery, or lamadium, brought bite and brightness to the wild fields of the West. This fragrant, hardy plant grew in dry, open areas and was prized for both its roots and leafy tops. The roots, when roasted or simmered, had an earthy flavor and were sometimes used medicinally for colds and coughs. The leaves, tender when young, resembled parsley or celery tops and were added to soups, broths, and meat dishes to punch up flavor. It was an early seasoning agent. Before bouillon cubes and dried herbs, there was lamadium. But for those who remembered its uses, it remained a reliable forage and flavorful friend. And if your greens need a sharper edge, one plant brought both tang and iron in spades, especially before it grew tall and tough. Meet yellow dock. Yellow dock, or Rumex crispus, wasn't shy. It made its mark in meadows and roadside ditches alike with its long, wavy leaves and deep taproot. Though technically a weed in many modern eyes, to indigenous communities, it was a nutritional powerhouse. The young greens, before they grew too bitter or tough, were packed with iron and tangy flavor, often boiled like spinach or added to early spring stews. The roots were sometimes roasted and ground into a coffee-like drink, while also used medicinally for blood health and digestion. As it matured, the leaves got stringier and the taste more intense. But when picked just right, it was a refreshing, mineral-rich green that cut through bland starches. And while it stood tall in fields and furrows, another humble vine was quietly coiling through the forest undergrowth, one whose tiny bean pods packed protein and a whole lot of promise. Hog peanut, or Amphicarpea bracteata, might just be one of the cleverest legumes in the wild pantry. Found creeping along forest edges in the eastern U.S., this twining vine pulls a double trick. It produces two types of beans, one that dangles from its vines like a typical legume, and another that hides underground, maturing in secret. This dual strategy meant double the food source, and for indigenous gatherers, it meant sustenance above and below the soil. These little legumes packed serious protein and were often used to round out a meal of roots or greens. They were also a wild clue that summer had arrived. But for all their cleverness, hog peanuts were delicate and labor-intensive to gather, a true forager's reward. Now, if you're ready to gamble on flavor and risk, the next plant might shock you. It's toxic in the wrong hands, but beloved in early spring when handled right. Pigeonberry, better known today as pokeweed, might send modern foragers running. But the young shoots of Phytolacca americana were once a springtime rite of passage. Gathered when just a few inches tall, before the plant had time to become toxic, these greens were boiled, sometimes 2 or 3 times, to leach out harmful compounds. Indigenous communities and later settlers prized poke for its bold flavor and seasonal predictability. It came back year after year, like clockwork, but it came with warnings. Eat it too old or undercooked, and you'd regret it. Still, for those who knew its ways, poke, or pigeon berry, was both a test of skill and a culinary treat. Yet for those who preferred something less risky but equally rich in protein, a wild legume from the Midwest stepped up as a humble hero of the fields. Wild bean, or Strophostyles helvula, isn't just another trailing legume. It's a native treasure with pods that fed the Midwest for generations. Twining through grasses and shrubs, it was a familiar sight in prairies and near riverbanks, and its bean pods were a quiet staple long before lentils and chickpeas hit the shelves. Tribes would harvest the pods while still green for fresh eating, or dry them for storage and winter use. Wild beans were one of those everywhere plants. You might not notice them unless you knew what to look for. But once spotted, they offered an easy-to-grow, easy-to-cook reward. As other legumes were introduced from abroad, wild beans fell out of common use, but they still hold the DNA of resilience. And while beans fed the landbound, those in arid deserts had another trick for leafy nutrition. Before chia became trendy for its seeds, its greens were already on the plate. Long before chia seeds became superfood icons, desert chia, especially Salvia columbariae, was valued for something else entirely: its greens. Found in the southwestern deserts, this mint family herb grew in dry, rocky soil and offered up tender leaves before its famous seed heads even formed. Indigenous communities, particularly in the Sonoran region, would steam or sauté the young greens as part of early meals. The flavor was herbal and slightly nutty, and the texture softened nicely in soups or stews. It was one of the first green things to arrive after the winter chill, signaling the start of the growing season and a shift in diet. The greens weren't flashy, but they were dependable, packed with micronutrients and gentle on the stomach. But while chia thrived in rocky desert ground, another plant was clawing its way to importance, not for its greens, but for its strange, curling fruit and its sticky, unexpected usefulness. Devil's claw, or Proboscidea parviflora, is the kind of plant that looks like it belongs in a folktale. Twisted, spiny, and full of surprises. Native to the arid Southwest, especially among the Tohono O'odham and Pima peoples, this wild squash-like plant served double duty: food in its youth and utility in its old age. When the seed pods were young and green, they were harvested and cooked like okra, mild, mucilaginous, and full of fiber. Some compared the texture to stewed zucchini or boiled beans, and they were often sliced, simmered, or thrown into stews with other desert vegetables. But once the pods matured, they hardened and curled into dark, claw-like shapes that gave the plant its ominous name. These dried claws weren't for eating. They were woven into baskets, used in crafts, and even traded as tools or decorative items. Devil's claw was a survival plant through and through. It gave nourishment when fresh and offered trade goods when dry.
Before spinach took over as the leafy green of choice, another plant dominated gardens and wild fields alike. Goosefoot, better known as lamb's quarters, was once a widely cultivated vegetable, packed with vitamins and minerals. For centuries, it was a reliable source of nutrition, thriving in almost any soil and growing faster than most cultivated greens. Rich in iron, calcium, and protein, lamb's quarters was a natural multivitamin, providing nourishment long before grocery store supplements existed. Farmers and home cooks used it much like spinach, steamed, sautéed, or tossed into soups and stews. The tender young leaves had a mild, slightly earthy flavor, making them perfect for fresh salads or even mixed into bread and porridge. Some cultures ground its tiny seeds into flour, using it as a grain substitute. Despite its usefulness, lamb's quarters disappeared from the dinner table as spinach rose in popularity. Spinach was easier to market, had a more uniform appearance, and didn't come with the stigma of being a weed. Over time, what was once a nutritious staple became something people pulled from their gardens instead of harvested. When you think of Amish cooking, few dishes embody their spirit of resourcefulness quite like chicken corn soup. This hearty, comforting recipe emerged from a practical need to make the most of every ingredient. In Pennsylvania Dutch tradition, nothing from the farm went to waste. Leftover chicken, fresh corn from summer fields, and even homemade egg noodles found their way into this one-pot wonder, making it a staple at gatherings and harvest celebrations. The ingredients are as unpretentious as they are nourishing. Shredded chicken, corn kernels, chicken broth, onions, and sometimes diced potatoes. But the secret to its unique texture lies in rivels, tiny dumplings made by combining flour and egg. This was a brilliant way to stretch the soup and make it heartier, feeding more people with less. From a health perspective, it's a winner. Packed with protein from the chicken, fiber from the corn, and wholesome carbohydrates from the rivels, it's a balanced meal in a bowl. Plus, it's incredibly versatile. Swap in canned corn during winter months or add leftover veggies for a customized twist. Frugal and filling, this soup exemplifies Amish practicality. Let's talk about a culinary pairing so simple it feels almost too obvious: eggs and butter. When combined into a creamy spread, it's a game changer. Egg butter, an unassuming mix of chopped boiled eggs and softened butter, was a staple born from practicality and versatility. Spread it on bread, pair it with crackers, or use it as a filling, and you've got a rich, satisfying treat. Egg butter has its roots in Northern and Eastern Europe, particularly Finland, where it's known as munavoi. Traditionally, it's served with rye bread or karjalan piraka, a type of pastry. Immigrants brought the recipe to America, where it found a home as a budget-friendly spread, especially during lean times. After all, when protein was scarce, this combination packed a double punch. Boiled eggs and butter were often kitchen staples, making this dish both accessible and economical. And if you think about it, it's essentially the predecessor to egg salad, only without the mayonnaise. With its velvety texture and timeless appeal, egg butter might just be the original butterboard's trend. Only, instead of Instagram likes, it earned a spot on the dinner table through sheer practicality. Not every bean stays neatly on the vine. Some like to show off. Yard-long beans, true to their name, could stretch up to 3 feet, dangling like green ropes from their climbing vines. Once a common sight in backyard gardens, these beans weren't just a novelty. They were a practical, high-yield crop that thrived in hot, humid climates where other beans struggled. Unlike traditional green beans, yard-long beans had a more tender texture and a subtly sweet, nutty flavor. Their ability to grow rapidly made them a reliable food source, often picked young for stir-fries, stews, or even sautéed with garlic and oil. In some regions, they were dried and stored for winter, ensuring food security long after the growing season ended. Why did these climbing giants disappear from most American gardens? It wasn't because of taste or nutrition. Yard-long beans are packed with fiber and vitamins. The problem was simple. They didn't fit into modern farming methods. Their lengthy, twisting shape made mechanical harvesting nearly impossible, and their need for trellises required more effort than bush beans. As large-scale agriculture took over, more uniform, easily processed beans took their place. In Amish communities, ingenuity often turns the simplest of ingredients into culinary treasures. Dandelion salad is a perfect example, a dish that transforms what many see as a pesky weed into a rustic, flavorful meal. Historically, dandelions were an easily foraged green, abundant in springtime and celebrated for their freshness after long winters of preserved foods. For the Amish, this salad was a symbol of renewal and resourcefulness. The ingredients are humble but effective. Tender dandelion greens, hard-boiled eggs, crispy crumbled bacon, and a warm dressing made from vinegar, sugar, and bacon drippings. The warm dressing wilts the greens slightly, blending the earthy bitterness of the dandelion with the richness of the bacon and the tangy sweetness of the vinegar. It's a simple balance of flavors that feels far more indulgent than it has any right to be. Versatility is one of the salad's strengths. Can't find dandelions? Swap in spinach or arugula. Prefer a vegetarian option. Skip the bacon and use olive oil in the dressing. And from a health perspective, dandelion greens are a powerhouse packed with vitamins A and C, calcium, and even detoxifying properties. Immigrant ingenuity often gave rise to some of America's most beloved comfort foods, and this one is no exception. Born from German-American kitchens, Goetta is a hearty breakfast staple that combines pork, beef, steel-cut oats, and spices into a savory sausage loaf. Its roots trace back to German immigrants in Cincinnati, Ohio, who adapted their traditional Grützwurst to the ingredients available in their new homeland. Stretching meat with oats made it more affordable while adding a unique, satisfying texture. Families would fry up slices of this loaf to serve alongside eggs, creating a breakfast that was not only filling but economical. Over time, it became a regional specialty, so beloved that it inspired annual festivals like the Glier's Goetta Fest, celebrating this humble yet delicious creation. Cincinnatians consume over 1 million pounds of Goetta annually. That's enough to make you wonder if oats might secretly be the city's fuel. What sets Goetta apart is its slow-cooked process, which allows the spices to meld with the oats and meat, creating a flavor that's savory, earthy, and utterly distinct. Skirret, a sweet, multi-rooted plant, was once a favorite among European settlers and early American farmers. Unlike the starchy single-tuber potato, Skirret produced clusters of thin, white roots packed with natural sugars and a subtle nutty flavor. Highly valued for its cold tolerance, Skirret thrived in poor soil and survived harsh winters when other crops failed. Cooks found endless ways to use it. Boiled, roasted, or mashed, it was a versatile ingredient that paired well with butter and spices. Some families even treated it like a parsnip, adding it to stews, while others blended it into fritters or pies for a naturally sweet bite. So why did this once beloved vegetable disappear? The answer is simple: efficiency. Skirret, with its delicate interwoven roots, was far trickier to harvest and clean than a bulky potato. When large-scale farming favored high-yield crops, Skirret was quietly replaced. Today, it's nearly forgotten outside heirloom gardening circles, but for those who rediscover it, the reward is undeniable. In Amish kitchens, nothing goes to waste, and even the humblest ingredients can shine. Take pickled red beets and eggs, a dish that marries practicality with a stunning pop of color. This tradition traces back to the Pennsylvania Dutch, where pickling was essential for preserving food through long winters. The process is as straightforward as it is ingenious. Beets are boiled, sliced, and combined with vinegar, sugar, water, and spices like cloves and cinnamon. Hard-boiled eggs are added to the jar, and over a few days, they soak up the vibrant beet color, turning a deep, jewel-toned magenta. The result is as striking on the plate as it is on the palate, with a sweet, sour, and slightly earthy flavor. Beyond their beauty, this dish is a masterclass in resourcefulness. Beets are inexpensive, and combining them with eggs, one of the most affordable sources of protein, creates a dish that's as economical as it is versatile. Serve it as a snack, a salad topping, or even a conversation starter at your next potluck. Health-wise, beets pack antioxidants, while eggs provide protein and essential vitamins. It's a dish that's good for the eyes, the stomach, and maybe even the soul. Before the carrot stole the spotlight, there was another root vegetable filling soup pots and roasting pans across America. Parsnips, with their pale skin and naturally sweet flavor, were once as common as potatoes, valued for their ability to survive the winter and grow in poor soil. Unlike carrots, which were selectively bred to be uniform and mild, parsnips developed a deeper caramel-like sweetness when roasted, making them a favorite in hearty stews and side dishes. In early American kitchens, parsnips were boiled, mashed, or even baked into cakes and breads. Before sugar was widely available, their natural sweetness made them a go-to ingredient for desserts. Farmers loved them for their ability to withstand frost. Cold weather only intensified their flavor, making them an essential crop for families relying on garden produce to last through the season. So why did parsnips fall out of favor? The answer lies in convenience. Carrots, with their smoother texture and faster growing cycle, became the go-to root vegetable, while parsnips, slower to mature and trickier to harvest, were gradually pushed aside. Their irregular shape didn't help either, making them harder to peel and process. In Amish homes, chicken and noodles was original comfort food, blending simple ingredients with a legacy of practicality. Historically, this meal was a way to make the most of farm staples. When a chicken was butchered, no part went to waste, and homemade egg noodles stretched the dish to serve a crowd. The recipe revolves around basic ingredients: shredded chicken, homemade egg noodles, chicken broth, and a touch of cream or butter for richness. The egg noodles are the star of the show, made with just flour and eggs, hand-rolled and cut with care. Once combined with a savory broth, they create a thick, hearty dish that's almost stew-like in texture. Versatility is where this recipe shines. Add carrots, celery, or peas for extra nutrition, or swap the chicken for turkey after a holiday meal. Leftovers are easily reheated, making it as practical as it is delicious. Health-wise, this dish is well-balanced. Lean protein from the chicken, carbohydrates from the noodles, and an option to sneak in vegetables. Economical, satisfying, and steeped in tradition, Amish chicken and noodles is a reminder that simple food can be simply extraordinary. During the toughest times in American history, the ability to turn scraps into sustenance was nothing short of a survival skill. Enter the humble yet hearty Slumgullion, a stew that thrived on resourcefulness. Born from the need to stretch ingredients, it was often made with whatever was on hand: potatoes, leftover meat, vegetables, and sometimes a dash of seasoning if you were lucky. It was less about following a recipe and more about making do with what you had. The name Slumgullion likely originated from 19th century mining camps, where the dish was cobbled together from bits and pieces miners could scavenge. The word itself might have started as slang for something watery or of questionable quality, though anyone who's had a well-made version would argue it's far better than the name suggests. Think of it as the original clean out the fridge meal, but with a lot more soul. It was filling, nutritious, and most importantly, affordable. And if someone complained about what was in it, well, they were promptly reminded that beggars couldn't be choosers. Slumgullion was a testament to the ingenuity and determination of those who faced hardship with a pot, a fire, and a whole lot of grit. A dish born of necessity but remembered for its practicality and heartiness. When coffee was scarce, people didn't just give up their morning cup, they got creative. Chicory root, roasted and brewed into a dark, earthy drink, became a go-to coffee substitute during tough times. From the Civil War to the Great Depression, when real coffee was too expensive or simply unavailable, this humble root kept America caffeinated, or at least feeling like it was. Unlike coffee, chicory contained no caffeine, but its roasted, slightly bitter flavor mimicked the real thing surprisingly well. It was a staple in New Orleans, where it became a permanent part of café au lait, blending with real coffee for a smooth, rich taste. Farmers and homesteaders loved chicory not just for its flavor, but for its resilience. It grew where other crops struggled, required little care, and had edible leaves as a bonus. So why did chicory root fade from American cups? Once coffee became widely available again, people eagerly returned to the real deal. Chicory, associated with hard times, was largely forgotten outside the South and a few niche markets. In the heart of Amish country, dessert is more than a treat. It's a reminder of life's simpler joys. Apple dumplings, a baked delight that dates back to early settlers, capture that spirit perfectly. These individually wrapped apples were born out of a culture that prioritized resourcefulness. With apples being plentiful in Pennsylvania orchards, turning them into dumplings was a way to stretch seasonal produce into something extraordinary. The process begins with basic ingredients: peeled and cored apples, pie dough, brown sugar, cinnamon, and butter. The apples are wrapped snugly in pastry, baked in a rich cinnamon syrup, and emerge golden and aromatic. The result is a dessert that looks like it belongs on the cover of a country cookbook and tastes even better. And if you're feeling adventurous, try swapping apples for pears or experimenting with fillings like raisins or walnuts. From a practical standpoint, this dessert is frugal in every sense. Leftover dough or bruised apples, perfect for dumplings. And let's not forget, apples bring fiber, antioxidants, and a dose of vitamin C to the table. It's dessert that works harder than it has to. Paired with a scoop of vanilla ice cream, it's indulgence wrapped in tradition. Long before grocery stores made vegetables look uniform and effortless, some plants demanded patience. Cardoon, a striking relative of the artichoke, was one of them. Towering in the garden with its silvery green leaves, it resembled a thistle. But unlike artichokes, its prize wasn't in the flower. It was in the stalks. Thick, ribbed, and slightly bitter, Cardoon had to be blanched for weeks before harvest to soften its texture and mellow its flavor. Once prepared, however, it was a delicacy. Italian and French immigrants brought their love for Cardoon to America, using it in gratins, soups, and stews. Many families dipped the stalks in batter and fried them, a rustic old-world dish reminiscent of fried celery. When slow-cooked, Cardoon developed a tender artichoke-like richness, pairing beautifully with butter, cream, and cheese. Despite its deep culinary roots, Cardoon never became a household staple in the U.S. It required space, time, and a cook willing to wrestle with its tough outer fibers. As convenience foods took over, Cardoon faded from home gardens, surviving only in niche farming circles. For centuries, before the potato took center stage in kitchens across the world, another root vegetable quietly dominated the dinner table. Few vegetables can claim to have fed both people and livestock, but Mangal-wurzel did just that. This oversized, rough-skinned beet was once a common sight on farms, valued for its ability to grow in poor soil and provide food through harsh winters. While mainly grown as animal fodder, Mangal-wurzel wasn't just for cows and pigs. During tough times, it became an important source of nutrition for families, especially in Europe and early America. When boiled or roasted, its flesh turned tender and slightly sweet, tasting like a cross between a beet and a turnip. Some cooked it in stews, while others mashed it with butter, turning it into a hearty side dish. Even the greens were edible, prepared just like Swiss chard. So why did this giant beet disappear from dinner tables? As farming became more industrialized, Mangal-wurzel was pushed aside for more refined crops. Its rough, irregular shape didn't fit the modern produce aisle, and its reputation as animal feed made it less appealing. But for those who still grow it, Mangal-wurzel is a reminder of a time when nothing went to waste. A vegetable that could feed a farm, a family, and everything in between. Few dishes capture the spirit of thrift and indulgence quite like a warm, wilted lettuce salad. It's a combination that's both practical and unexpectedly decadent. A bed of fresh lettuce gently softened by a hot bacon fat dressing. If that doesn't sound like a love letter to resourcefulness, what does? This dish traces its roots back to rural American kitchens, where wasting food was unthinkable. When lettuce was abundant and bacon fat was too valuable to discard, clever cooks turned to this ingenious recipe. The heat from the dressing slightly wilts the greens, creating a tender, flavorful base. The addition of crumbled bacon, a splash of vinegar, and sometimes a sprinkle of sugar made it a savory, sweet masterpiece. The magic of this salad lies in its balance. It's humble yet rich, fresh yet comforting. It transformed humble greens into something hearty and satisfying, a rare feat for a salad in those days. Variations of this recipe can be found across different cultures, proving that the idea of combining warm fats with greens is truly universal. In a time when every resource counted, wilted lettuce salad turned a simple garden harvest into a dish worthy of the family table. In the 18th century, Pennsylvania Dutch settlers brought with them a culinary tradition that turned flour and sugar into a carnival-worthy creation. While funnel cakes are often associated with fairgrounds today, their roots are firmly planted in Amish and Mennonite communities. Originally known as dripping cake, these crispy, golden treats were a testament to the art of turning simple ingredients into something spectacular. The batter itself is straightforward: flour, eggs, milk, sugar, and a pinch of baking powder. The magic happens when it's poured through a funnel into hot oil, creating delicate, lacy designs that are as pleasing to the eye as they are to the palate. A dusting of powdered sugar finishes the masterpiece, though modern variations might add cinnamon or fruit toppings. Funnel cakes required minimal ingredients and no fancy equipment, making them accessible to families with limited means. Leftover batter could be saved for another day, stretching resources even further. Health benefits might not be the first thing you associate with fried dough, but there's no harm in a little indulgence now and then. And if you're making them at home, you control the oil, portion size, and toppings. In the toughest conditions, when other crops failed, one humble bean thrived. Cowpeas, better known as black-eyed peas, were a survival food, deeply rooted in Southern agriculture and African American culinary traditions. Drought-resistant and packed with protein, these legumes were a staple, nourishing families for generations. Hardy and fast-growing, cowpeas enriched the soil with nitrogen, making them a favorite among farmers who needed to keep their land fertile. In the kitchen, they were just as valuable. Slow-cooked with smoked meats, stewed into hearty dishes, or mixed with rice for the famous Hoppin' John, black-eyed peas were affordable, filling, and full of flavor. During tough times, they stretched meals, proving that a simple bean could be a lifesaver. But as modern diets leaned toward pre-packaged convenience, cowpeas took a back seat. They weren't as flashy as quinoa or as trendy as chickpeas, and as fresh vegetables became more accessible year-round, these humble legumes lost their everyday presence at the dinner table. Yet, in Southern kitchens and among those who appreciate true food history, black-eyed peas remain a symbol of resilience, one that reminds us that sometimes the most unassuming foods are the ones that stand the test of time. In a world before social media, recipes traveled the old-fashioned way, through hands, homes, and shared traditions. Amish friendship bread is a prime example of this, not just a recipe, but a tradition steeped in connection. Its roots lie in the idea of a sourdough starter, passed from person to person, with each batch carrying a little piece of the past. It was a gesture of kindness, a way to nurture relationships in the simplest, most delicious way. The recipe starts with the starter itself, a mix of flour, sugar, milk, and yeast that ferments over time. Once you're handed a starter, you feed it for 10 days like a culinary pet before using part of it to bake. The remaining starter was passed along to friends and neighbors, spreading not just bread, but community. The bread itself is a sweet, spiced loaf, often flavored with cinnamon and sometimes with add-ins like nuts or chocolate chips. Economically, it's brilliant, using pantry staples to create a treat that's easily shared or stored. And health-wise, the fermentation process adds a slight probiotic benefit, while the loaf's wholesome ingredients make it a real sugary indulgence. A single starter can yield endless variations, ensuring that no two loaves or friendships are exactly the same. In a world before social media, recipes traveled the old-fashioned way, through hands, homes, and shared traditions. Amish friendship bread is a prime example of this, not just a recipe, but a tradition steeped in connection. Its roots lie in the idea of a sourdough starter, passed from person to person, with each batch carrying a little piece of the past. It was a gesture of kindness, a way to nurture relationships in the simplest, most delicious way. The recipe starts with the starter itself, a mix of flour, sugar, milk, and yeast that ferments over time. Once you're handed a starter, you feed it for 10 days like a culinary pet before using part of it to bake. The remaining starter was passed along to friends and neighbors, spreading not just bread, but community. The bread itself is a sweet, spiced loaf, often flavored with cinnamon and sometimes with add-ins like nuts or chocolate chips. Economically, it's brilliant, using pantry staples to create a treat that's easily shared or stored. And health-wise, the fermentation process adds a slight probiotic benefit, while the loaf's wholesome ingredients make it a real sugary indulgence. A single starter can yield endless variations, ensuring that no two loaves or friendships are exactly the same. Some vegetables need constant replanting. Others take care of themselves. Egyptian walking onions, a hardy, self-propagating perennial, did exactly that. Instead of growing from the ground up like traditional onions, they formed clusters of small bulbs at the tops of their stalks. When the weight became too much, the stalks bent, planting the bulbs into the soil, giving the impression that these onions were walking across the garden. Farmers and homesteaders valued them for their reliability. Unlike standard onions that had to be replanted each season, Egyptian walking onions came back year after year, thriving in poor soil and harsh conditions. Their greens were harvested like scallions, while their underground bulbs were used just like regular onions. The flavor was sharp and pungent, making them ideal for soups, stews, and pickling. Some families even caramelized them for a rich, sweet onion spread. So why aren't they filling produce aisles today? Their irregular, unpredictable growth didn't fit the demands of large-scale farming. Unlike uniform, neatly packaged onions, these had a mind of their own, marching around the garden at their own pace.
That wraps it up for today's list of Native American must-haves we need to bring back. Did you get any ideas for your garden? Share it with us in the comments below.